Once upon a time, in a small, unforgiving town, there lived a girl named Clara who had never known kindness from the world around her. She was larger than the other girls her age, and because of her weight, the people whispered cruel words and treated her as though her worth were something to be mocked. Her own family, burdened by pride and greed, thought of her as a blemish on their name. When the day came that they could no longer bear the weight of her presence, they sought to rid themselves of her in the harshest way possible. They arranged her fate like a transaction, delivering her to a poor farmer on the edge of town, calling it her punishment. She was to live with him, cook, clean, and labor as repayment for the shame she had brought them simply by existing. Clara, suitcase in hand and heart heavy with despair, thought her life was over. She believed she had been discarded into misery, given to a man she had never met, someone they said was rough, uneducated, and impoverished. She carried within her a deep sadness, thinking she would never be loved, never be wanted, never be cherished. The farmer's name was Thomas, a man of quiet strength who lived in simplicity and solitude. When Clara arrived at his farmhouse, dusty road curling behind her, she did not lift her eyes. She expected harsh words, cold orders, and a life where her spirit would wither away. But Thomas did not speak immediately. He only looked at her, at the girl who had been cast aside like a broken thing, and his heart stirred with a compassion he did not show the world. He saw not her size, nor the shame others had placed upon her, but a soul trembling under the weight of rejection. He held out his hand to her gently, not as a master to a servant, but as one human reaching for another. She hesitated, for kindness was foreign to her, and she did not know if she could trust it. In the days that followed, Clara learned the rhythm of the farm. She rose before dawn, baked bread, tended to chickens, and tried with all her might to prove she was useful. She worked until her hands ached, afraid Thomas might find her lacking. Yet Thomas never raised his voice, never treated her as less. He often worked beside her, his hands rough with labor, his silence steady but warm. At night, when the lantern light flickered against the wooden walls, he would tell her about the land, how his father and grandfather had worked it, how each field held a story. Clara began to notice how the soil seemed endless, how the horizon stretched far beyond what she had first seen. One day, curiosity overcame her fear, and she asked him how much land he truly owned. He smiled softly and told her he did not like to boast, but the truth was he held thousands of acres, rich farmland that made him far from poor. Shock filled her. All her life, she had been told she was given away to a man beneath even her family's disdain, but now she realized they had been blind. Thomas was not a poor farmer. He was a man of quiet wealth and deeper riches of the heart. Still, it was not his land or his prosperity that transformed Clara, but the way he treated her. He never once called her a burden. He never once mocked her body or compared her to others. When she cooked, he praised her skill. When she laughed, he listened as if the sound was rare and precious. And slowly, she began to feel something she had never known. She began to feel worthy. For the first time, Clara allowed herself to dream. One evening, as the sun set in golden fire across the fields, Clara stood watching the horizon. She held her hands across her middle, still burdened by the old shame that clung to her. Thomas came to her side, standing in silence before finally saying, "You know, the land stretches on further than the eye can see, but still, it means nothing if there is no one to share it with." Clara turned to him, her breath catching at the sincerity in his eyes. He reached for her hand, his voice low and steady. "They gave you to me thinking you were punishment, but Clara, you are the greatest gift this land has ever known." Tears welled in her eyes, for no one had ever spoken to her like that before. No one had ever seen her as anything other than a weight, and here was a man who saw her as treasure. As the seasons turned, Clara's spirit blossomed like the fields in spring. She found joy in the simple things, kneading dough, planting seeds, feeding calves, and even more joy in the quiet moments she shared with Thomas. They would sit on the porch in the cool of the evening, the sound of cicadas rising like music around them, his hand always finding hers. Clara, once condemned to a life of shame, found herself cherished, respected, and loved. She realized that true wealth was not in what her family had sought, status, power, appearances, but in the gentleness of a heart that saw beyond flesh, beyond scars, beyond judgment. Years passed, and those who had cast Clara aside eventually heard whispers of her life. They learned that the girl they had discarded now lived on land that stretched for miles, beside a man who adored her. Yet even then, they could not fathom the truth, that her happiness was not born of acres or prosperity, but of love pure and steadfast. Clara never sought revenge, never returned to throw their cruelty back at them. Instead, she lived quietly, her joy a silent testament to a life rebuilt from ashes. And so, what began as a punishment became a blessing beyond measure. The obese girl, once given away, as though she was nothing, had become a woman who was everything to the man who loved her. She had been planted in soil meant to break her, but instead she grew strong, rooted in kindness, watered by love, flourishing in a life more beautiful than she ever dared to imagine. My friends, let me tell you a story, not of riches or titles, not of beauty as the world measures it, but of love, so honest and strong that it overturned the cruelties of fate and the harshness of people's hearts. And may it serve as a reminder to each of us of what truly matters in this life. For there was once a girl named Clara, born into a world that saw only her size, a world that forgot that beneath body beats a heart that longs for kindness and a soul that aches to be seen. She was ridiculed, shamed, and made to believe that she was nothing more than a burden. And when her family, blinded by arrogance and poisoned by their own pride, sought to be rid of her, they gave her away as one would discard a broken object. They handed her to a farmer, not with love or blessing, but as punishment, a sentence, as if she were unworthy of dignity or choice. And so Clara packed her few belongings, carried her battered suitcase, and walked toward a future that she believed would be harsher than the past she had known, her head bowed, her spirit already crushed. For who could expect mercy from a man she was told was poor, unpolished, and bound to labor in the dirt? And when she arrived at the farmhouse, the air thick with dust and silence, she met Thomas, the farmer who had been chosen for her fate, and she prepared her heart for orders, for scorn, for the same rejection she had known all her life. But instead, Thomas stood there, quiet and steady, his eyes not filled with judgment, but with a compassion that unsettled her. And when he stretched out his hand, it was not the gesture of a master demanding service, it was the invitation of a soul reaching out to another soul. And in that moment, though she could not see it then, her life began to turn, for Thomas was not the poor man she had been told about. No, he owned thousands of acres, fields that stretched farther than the horizon itself, land that could have made him boastful or proud. But Thomas's true wealth was not in the soil. It was in the gentleness of his heart, and Clara, though she did not know it yet, was about to discover what it meant to be loved. And as the days passed, she tried to prove her worth. Waking early, working hard, cooking, cleaning, tending to the animals, always afraid he might send her away if she failed, always haunted by the voices of her family telling her she was never enough. But Thomas never measured her by those cruel standards. Instead, he worked beside her, shoulder to shoulder, teaching her the rhythm of the earth, listening to her laughter as though it was music, praising her efforts as though every loaf of bread she baked was a feast. And slowly, a new seed was planted in Clara's heart, a seed of worth, of hope, of belonging, and she began to see the truth that had been hidden from her, that this man, this farmer, was not a punishment, but a gift beyond measure. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in gold, Clara asked about his land, timid, uncertain, and Thomas smiled, not with arrogance but with humility, and told her of acres upon acres, the inheritance of his fathers, the wealth in his stewardship, and Clara stood in stunned silence. For all her life she had been told he was poor, yet here he was, richer than any of those who had cast her away, but more than the land, more than the barns and fields. What mattered was the way he looked at her, not with disdain, not with pity, but with love so steady it broke through the years of shame she carried. And Thomas said to her words that would forever live in her heart, "They gave you to me thinking you were punishment, but Clara, you are the greatest blessing this land has ever seen." And with those words her tears fell, for never had anyone spoken to her like that. Never had anyone seen her worth not despite who she was but because of who she was. And in that moment, Clara understood that love, true love, does not weigh the body, does not count the scars, does not measure by the world's shallow yardsticks. Love sees the soul, and in Thomas's eyes she was radiant, beautiful, treasured. And so the days turned into years, and Clara blossomed, not because she lost weight, not because she transformed to fit the mold the world demanded, but because she was finally allowed to be herself, finally watered by kindness, finally rooted in a place where she was wanted. And together they built a life of quiet joy, working the land, sharing laughter on the porch at dusk, whispering dreams under the stars. And though the world that cast her aside eventually heard of her life, how she lived upon vast acres, how she was the wife of a man respected and prosperous, they could not understand that her greatest fortune was not the land nor the house, but the simple truth that she was loved beyond condition. Clara never sought vengeance. She did not return to shame those who shamed her. Instead she lived, she loved, she flourished, and her happiness itself was the answer to their cruelty. For the girl they had tried to discard became a woman who was cherished beyond measure. And so I say to you tonight, remember Clara's story. Remember that the worth of a person is never defined by size, by shape, by wealth, or by the lies of others. True worth is revealed when love meets the soul, when kindness replaces cruelty, when acceptance lifts the broken. And may we never forget that sometimes the punishment the world tries to give us is in fact the doorway to our greatest blessing. And may we all strive to love as Thomas loved, seeing not the flesh but the heart, not the weight but the soul, for in the end it is love, and only love, that redeems, that restores, that transforms what was cast away into something precious beyond price.